guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. Now, way back at the end of June / beginning of July, I decided to set myself a mammoth big summer reads TBR. I had some absolutely huge books on that list that I wanted to try and read if I had the chance, and today I didn't do a wrap up at the end of July and I'm kind of doing my whole big summer reads wrap up today. So that is all the books that I read and listened to in July and all the books that I've read and listened to in August combined into one big wrap up. So without further ado, let's talk about some books. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Grace and Fury by Tracy Banghart, and I have mentioned this in a few of my videos already, but I finished this right at the very beginning of July and I didn't include it in a proper wrap-up, so I'm going to talk about it very briefly now. This is a young adult new fiction novel. It's about two sisters, it's a fantasy, it's set in a world where women basically have no rights, and there is a very Italian, Venetian, Romanesque feel to this book, but basically women have no rights, men are in a position of power, and the ideal job role for a woman, as it were, is to become a grace to the heir, which basically is like a fantastical version of a harem, as much as I could understand it, to become almost like a concubine for the person in a position of power. And these two sisters are very, very different. One is very subservient and very obedient, and one is very rebellious. And there is a huge twist at the start of this book that I'm not going to go into, but really just sets the pace for this entire story. And we basically have one sister who is chosen to be a grace and one sister who is sent to a female prison on a remote island in the middle of nowhere. And this book is just fantastic. It's fast paced, it's quick, it's really easy to read, it's really intriguing. There were a few flaws and a few issues that I had with it, but I was willing to overlook them just because of the pacing and the intrigue that I felt when I was reading this. And if you have not yet picked up a copy and you like YA fast-paced fantasy, then I would definitely recommend this. The next book I picked up was Renegade by Marissa Meyer, and following my reading of this, I've decided that I am an on-the-fence reader of Marissa Meyer's work. I enjoyed probably a third of the Lunar Chronicles. I didn't enjoy Heartless so much, but I really enjoyed this one. So fingers crossed that she keeps producing novels on a par with this. So this is again a YA fantasy book. It's set in a world where we have superheroes. Society has been turned upside down on its head, and we have got superheroes who are known as renegades, and they are part of a huge organization. Children, young adults can apply to be a part of this organization, and they use their special abilities, their supernatural abilities, to do all kinds of things and to keep society safe. We have normal everyday people, and then you have anarchists, who are people with special abilities who would, in a typical superhero story, be classed as the villains. And so this book focuses on two protagonists. We have Nova, who is an anarchist. She has special abilities. She watched her family die. She believed the renegades were going to come and save her family, and they didn't. And so she harbours a deep hatred of anything related to the renegades. And then we have Adrian, who is the son of two of the most powerful renegades, but he's harbouring a secret of his own, and their two worlds collide and things happen, and it's just very good. Again, I did have a few issues with it. It was a little bit tropey and a little bit slow in places, but for the most part I was willing to overlook this because I just thought that it was such an interesting concept. I know that some people have kind of criticised and said they're a little bit tired of superhero villain stories, but this is the first one that I have read in a really long time, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that Marissa Meyer had the pacing almost perfect. As I said, it was a little slow in places. I liked the banter between Nova and Adrian. I really love the character of Adrian, and although I think that this is a duology because I was left with quite a lot of questions at the end, yeah, I just thought that it was really good. Possibly my only criticism of the book is that there are quite a lot of extraneous characters who I would have enjoyed learning more about, and I would have enjoyed learning more about their backstory, but there simply wasn't time. And I feel like if she'd cut down on the number of additional characters, then it maybe would have made the story a bit more fluid. But on the whole, another one that I really enjoyed. There is a little bit of a theme in this month's books in that they are largely fantasy based, but the next book is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This was the Bookish Mama's pick for July. If you don't know, I run a book club with two other wonderful ladies, and you don't have to be a mama to join. We just all happen to be mothers, so that's the name that we picked. I will link to the Facebook group down below if you want to join. We are currently focusing on a different genre every month and voting for our favourite book. So we picked fantasy for July, and this was the one that came out top. And this is a very, very highly acclaimed novel. It is the author's debut. It has been doing the rounds for many months on BookTube, and I was a little bit late to the game myself picking it up, but I have unfortunately fallen hard for this book. If you don't enjoy it, I'm really sorry, but I am one of those who is a solid fan of this book. Again, it's set in a fantastical world, but it has a strong sense of West African culture, which I really loved. I have read some of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's books, but apart from that, I don't think that I have ever read a book set in West Africa before, certainly not a fantasy. And I loved the way that the author allowed this to influence so much of her writing, and I just really appreciated that. So this is set in a world where magic has been eradicated. There were people with magic and there were people without, and all the people who had magical abilities, known as the Magi, were slaughtered in a mass genocide. And this book was written, it's really interesting actually. If you read the author's note at the back of the book, the author talks a lot about her inspiration for the book, and it is very much a commentary on today's society. It touches on a lot of very important issues that we are facing in today's society, and I love the way that she did that in a book that was fantasy based and that could be used for slightly older children. I had originally, when I picked this up, thought that I might give it to Meg, but it does have some quite dark elements, including scenes of torture, sexual abuse and all that kind of stuff that perhaps is just a little bit too dark for a younger audience. But again, it was a really good talking point for the book club. It brought up a lot of different issues, and it's not just your run-of-the-mill fantasy book. It had a much deeper essence to it, and I really appreciated that as well. Our protagonist, Zelly's mother, was a Magi and she was killed, and Zelly finds herself in a position where she is basically responsible for the restoration of magic to society, and I'm not going to say much more than that. The back of this book is exceptionally vague, and I think that that is possibly the best way to go into this, because you just don't know what is coming around every corner, and I thought that that was a really exciting and adventurous way to read the book, and I would highly recommend doing the same. If you can avoid being spoiled, then do, but just know that this is a YA fantasy. It has a strong magic system, it has strong West African influence, and that just for me sold it completely. Then we finished listening to the audiobook of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. We have been listening to this in the car with the kids, and we've listened to it over probably about a month. They are really enjoying it. It's narrated by Stephen Fry, and I mentioned this as well in a previous video, but he was a fantastic choice for the narration. He has a very easy to listen to voice, and the kids are really enjoying it. We're currently now listening to the second one, The Chamber of Secrets, but I can tick that off as my audiobook for the month. Okay, then on to the completion of my main challenge for my big summer reads, which was to read one or two really big books. And earlier in the year I said that I really wanted to reread A Song of Ice and Fire. I have not read part 2 of A Dance with Dragons, and I wanted to start at the beginning and go all the way through in the blind, possibly vain hope that the final book will have been released by the time I get to the end of it, but I wanted to make some serious inroads. So I picked up A Game of Thrones, which is book 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire. This book sits at, let me just double check, 830 pages, so it is a real whopper. This is high fantasy, this is character driven, this is absolutely one of my all-time favourite books. I don't believe that there is going to be a single person in the BookTube world who does not know about Game of Thrones, or in the wider world thanks to the television series, so I don't think that I need to go into too much detail other than to say that I am really enjoying rereading these books. There's so much content and so much depth to them, and I'm finding either stuff that I've forgotten or maybe stuff that I didn't pick up the first time that I read them that I'm now discovering, and that includes a huge reveal, which my friend, after I said that I had made this realization, told me has only just been revealed in the TV show, and the TV show is ahead of the books. So the fact that I've managed to put all the pieces together and work it out, because I don't watch the TV show if you didn't know, it's just amazing. But it seems so obvious, and it's to do with Jon Snow's parentage, and I feel like it's been staring me in the face the entire time, but it took picking this book up again and reading it for me to realise that is literally just been so obvious from day dot. But yeah, anyway, they don't read fast, but I find myself so easily immersed in this world. And honestly, for people who feel intimidated by the size of this book, feel intimidated, but pick it up and read it anyway, because if you enjoy high fantasy, if you enjoy good character development, good strong storytelling, then you will not regret picking this up. And I feel like, although I think it's classed as high fantasy, I've referred to it as high fantasy twice now, there's enough of our world and the influences of our world that you don't feel like you're getting all caught up in things that you need to try and grasp or understand. It's just fantastic, and I'm really pleased that I picked it up and read it. And off the back of that, I'll just quickly talk about the book that I'm currently reading, because it is the second book, book 2 of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I am halfway through. So my main goal was to read these two, and it is the final day of August today, and I'm not gonna get that read because this book again comes in at 738 pages, but I'm making good headway, and hopefully in the next week or so I will have this one done. So that will be the main purpose of my big summer reads ticked off, and I'm really pleased with how much progress I have made. And I've got a few other books to talk about, but I'm currently reading this. I'm almost finished with this and I am loving it. These two books have just made my summer so much more interesting and exciting, and again, it just is the same. It's reading. I'm just finding myself so immersed in the world and I don't want to come out of it. It's fantastic. Okay, the next book that I picked up, I am still not entirely sure how I feel about, so I'm going to talk about it as briefly as I can, and that is When God Was a Rabbit by Sarah Winman. I know a number of people who adore this book and who have recommended this book to me on a number of occasions, but I'm just not sure how I feel about it. It's a contemporary about a brother and a sister and their relationship. It's got family drama, it's got a little bit of magical realism in the form of a talking rabbit, it's got childhood issues, it's got childhood traumas, it's got secrets and mystery, and it's okay, but I feel like it wasn't enough of one thing or another to really make it work. So the magical realism elements, including the talking rabbit, including a man who knows the day he's going to die and how he's going to die, are not so much a feature of the book that you find yourself believing them. So it's almost like a perfectly normal contemporary family drama story that you have to somehow buy into these exceptional moments, which just didn't really seem to fit well for me. It felt a little bit jarring to suddenly have those moments kind of thrown in to the mix of this story. As far as the main bulk of the story goes, I really enjoyed it, and I thought that it was an interesting reflection on what childhood would have been like in the late 60s, early 70s, right through to present day. The author does a really good job of keeping her references very relevant and very cultural, and yeah, I enjoyed it on the whole, but I just didn't feel like it was much of one thing or another, and I'm still interested to pick up some more of Sarah Winman's other books. I have another one, A Year of Marvellous Ways, I think she wrote, but yeah, I have kind of on the fence feelings about this book, and I haven't yet quite decided how I feel. Probably a bit meh. And because I want to end this video on a high, I'm going to mix the last two books up and talk about the one that I liked least first, and then the book that I liked the most final, even though I didn't read them in that order. So the next book was the August Bookish Mama's pick, and this was Together by Julie Cohen. We wanted to read something more contemporary and light-hearted for August because that seemed like the perfect summer read, and this is a book about a married couple, and right at the very beginning of the story, the husband gets up one morning, leaves his wife asleep, goes and swims off and kills himself, and you learn that within the first few pages, and it is totally heartbreaking to read, and I thought when I first started reading it, if this sets the pace for the rest of the book, it's going to be a really, really difficult read. And you flip-flop between various different time periods. You quickly learn that this couple, although their love for each other is strong and obvious, and they have such a deep-rooted connection and adoration for one another, that they are hiding a number of significant secrets. And as the story goes on, and as you go backwards and forwards in time, you begin to uncover what those secrets are. For a book club choice, it was fantastic because there was a whole lot of things to talk about, and that's what you want in a book club book, isn't it? But I only gave this book 2 stars, and there are a number of reasons why that is. The writing is beautiful, the setting is beautiful, the author weaves a connection to the ocean into the entire storyline, which I thought was exceptionally well done. But it's hard to say exactly what my issues were with this book without going into too many spoilers. The first thing I will say is that this book handed us a number of huge issues, but only dealt with them on a really surface level. Now, for a fluffy contemporary read about love, that's probably perfectly acceptable, but I am beginning to realise about myself that I'm not a surface level reader. If you're going to suggest child abduction, if you're going to suggest abuse, alcoholism, adoption, abandonment, dementia, any of these things, if you're going to suggest any of these huge issues, you are going to need to deal with them properly. You cannot just throw something at me and then move the storyline on. It's just not for me. It doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. I don't enjoy it, and I think that that is a very personal thing. I'm sure that other people can just get on with it perfectly fine, but I just don't think that I'm that kind of reader. I found that really difficult, and there are a lot of huge issues in here that just do not get properly dealt with at all. On top of that, the biggest secret that this book contains, the huge whopper secret that this book contains, which is an absolute game changer for the entire way that you have viewed the book, is only revealed in the very last pages and is not dealt with at all. And I felt just so annoyed at the author that she would just throw this thing at us and then just, that's it, that's the end of the book, and I just don't see how that can be, and I just felt duped. I don't mind, you know, if you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I don't particularly like reading books with unreliable narrators or books where the author changes everything that you've read at the very end, and I feel like that's what she did with this in a major way, which I obviously can't talk about because it will be spoilery. But yeah, ultimately got to the end of this book and just felt really let down. Like, on the surface it's a really sweet love story, and I was rooting for our couple the entire way through, and I thought that it was so beautifully written, but ultimately I felt completely let down at the end, and just, yeah, it just didn't do it for me, I'm afraid. But I wanted to end this video on a high, and one of my favourite books that I read was a buddy read with Krista from Books and Jams. I will link to her channel down below because she is absolutely fantastic and I love buddy reading with her. This is the second buddy read that we've done, and she's just such a good person to buddy read with. I love bouncing theories off her, and that was Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This was my first Neil Shusterman. When I hauled this book in June, I think I referred to it as dystopian, and somebody corrected me and said that it's more utopian than dystopian, so I apologise for the mix-up there. But this is a book set in our world, and it's basically where death has been eradicated, disease, illness, everything has been eradicated by the creation of something called the Thunderhead. So there is no poverty because the Thunderhead decides how much food we need to produce, and there is enough for everybody to eat. There is no death because you have nanites in our systems that can repair and repel just about anything going. But in order to control the population, there is a group of people called the Scythes, and their job is basically to go and cull people, and they have a certain number of people that they have to cull every month. And our story focuses on 2 young apprentices who have been chosen to train up and basically become Scythes. And that is all I'm going to say, but I really enjoyed Neil Shusterman's style of writing. It was so easy and so fluid, and I just flew through it. I did guess one of the big reveals in this, but I'm finding more and more that that is tending to happen, and I'm minding less and less because I don't think that it necessarily ruins my enjoyment of the story. I quite enjoy being proved right. But yeah, I just thought that this was fantastic if you like utopian slash dystopian with an interesting premise, because I think the idea of having scythes in our society is it raises quite a few good discussion points, such as who has the right to take another person's life, how on earth do you decide how you're going to take someone's life, how do you live with yourself, because ultimately these people are still human, and although death and disease and poverty and all the kind of negatives of society have been dealt with, they still have those human emotions. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with taking people's lives repeatedly and that not impact you? And there were so many beautiful moments in this book and quotes that I wanted to pull out and write down because they just really struck a chord with me as I was reading. And yeah, I just really love this. I would highly recommend it if you're thinking about reading it and it sounds like your style of book, that I would definitely go for it. I will 100% be reading Thunderhead. I've already ordered it, and I will definitely be looking up more of Neil Shusterman's books because his writing style just really spoke to me. I really enjoyed it. It was absolutely fantastic. So there you go, they are the books that I read over the summer months. I will be pulling together my September TBR shortly. I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to kind of scrap the books that were left over from this TBR as we go into more of an autumnal season. Definitely gonna have to think about that one. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Do let me know what your favourite books were over the summer, if you read any of the same books as me, what you thought about them. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and I'll see you all very soon.